Well, um, John chapter 13 is my passage for us, our passage for us today. 21 is where I will pick up the reading. I wish I could read the entire chapter, in fact, because I will be mentioning much of everything, but I will read from 21 to 30, and this is particularly dealing with the problem of Judas Iscariot. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his heart, in his spirit, and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter mentioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do quickly." Now, no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money back, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. If you have been following our schedule for daily Bible, you would notice that chapter 13 is what we were assigned for the past week, and then last few days we've gone back to Psalms, and there will be a bit of a pause on the Gospel of John until the coming month, where we are anticipating everything to kind of line up with the Easter, the week of Passion and also Easter. So we have a bit of a pause from this week, but I really hope that you are making it a routine, that as I always say to you, because there are ways to really take advantage of some of the ways that we do ministry, and one important part is that we do ministry according to the schedule of daily Bible. So if you can, if not daily, at least weekly, catch up and be prepared for the Sunday message, I think that'll be tremendous for you. It'll be great because you're kind of anticipating already what will be spoken, and your mind will engage. We talk about being a hermeneutical community, and I really hope that you will come on board with that. So I want to encourage you one more time. So we are on John chapter 13 today. And if you were meditating on John 13, you might have found a couple of scenes or a couple of themes that really kind of came out because you are not unfamiliar with it. You kind of knew, having lived or having been in the community of church, you know certain things pretty well. For example, what Jesus said to the disciples by giving the new commandment, "I give you a new commandment, love one another as I have loved you." I mean, how many times have you heard that? But this is where it appears in very straightforward language. Jesus said, "This is a new commandment. This is something that I lay down to you," and it's a summary of the great commandments of the Old Testament. This is really the commandment, but what's really new about it is that now I'm telling you to love one another as I have loved you. And Jesus is already talking about his intention to lay down his life for his people. So in this progression, John is very interesting in that the Gospel of John is majority of the Gospel of John is not covering the first, the whole public ministry of Jesus. There's actually a very shortened version of it, and much of it is in the last week of the suffering. It's almost like the entire John is a a preview to the death of Christ on the cross. It's really highlighting the very fact that Jesus is the Passover lamb. And whenever Jesus gives the command to the disciples, it's very hard to get away with this image that Jesus is going to lay down his life for us so that we may have new life. And the other thing that might really have come alive to you is that whole story about feet washing. Jesus washed the feet of the 12. The feet washing may be something that you have actually experienced in your Christian walk of life. It used to be, I don't know whether people still try to do it, but like the last day of retreat, whenever you want to do something pretty dramatic, you have the feet washing ceremony. And it's there's a bit of a risk. I think I've done that when I was doing like youth ministry and stuff. The risk is that, because it's kind of so intimate for someone to touch your feet, you end up giggling and laughing, and that's the horrible way to go, right? But there are those moments when in the Spirit's movement, I would say, the way the Spirit moves the heart, people really break down. I witnessed one very moving feet washing ceremony at this place called WEC, which is a mission organization. Their headquarters, the U.S. headquarters, is actually in Camp Hill, which is not far from my home. And I was invited to one of the commissioning services. So they have a training session for missionaries. So people from U.S. and in fact around the world came to be trained for months. And it was time for them to be commissioned. And all the missionaries, veteran missionaries who are the trainers, took time to wash the feet of those who were leaving. And oh boy, I non-stop crying. Everyone was just bawling. It was quite a scene because there's something amazingly powerful about someone stooping down and serving other person in such a way the person feels it so intimately. And that's what feet washing is. And Jesus did that. And Jesus is the one who did it. And when you think about it, the very act of feet washing itself isn't uncommon in the first century. In fact, this was a very common practice. They were not able to bathe every day, like we take shower almost every day, right? Because it's very convenient for us. They couldn't do that. The roads were very unpaved and dusty. People wore sandals with a lot of openings to the feet. And when the master of the house came back came back home after a kind of routine, outside routines, and one of the responsibilities that the slaves, the servants, had to do at home, people that were serving, they had to bring out a basin of water and wash the feet of the master so that they could carry on the indoor stuff. This was a very common thing. But the gospel irony in the story here, in what Jesus had done, and he spells it out actually, he talks about it to the disciples that you call me Lord. I am the Lord, in a sense, you are my servants. I am the teacher, I'm the rabbi, you are my pupils, you're your students. I am the upper guy, you are the lower guys. But don't forget, even though that be true, I'm the one who washed your feet. The whole gospel story is not that one who is low is serving the high. Okay, if the gospel started that way, then there won't be any surprise. If it was one of the servants who died for the sake of a master, you would say, wow, that's really loving, that's very touching, but it wouldn't be strange. But it's the highest, it's the greatest who came to the lowest point to give his life for those who are undeserving, right? That's the whole story. And in this feet washing, we see the very picture of the gospel, the good news of what kind of God we serve. what kind of Jesus we serve, right? It's the greatness of Christ demonstrated in his humble self-giving. So Jesus said, just as I, your Lord, and your, in a sense, your master, I'm the one who is above you. In fact, I am the Son of God. I am God. Jesus said it many times. I am the one who's responsible for your being, yet I'm the one who gave myself to you. I'm the one who stooped low, come down to wash your feet. And if this is something that registered into your mind, don't ever live your life to wield your power. Don't abuse your position of importance as a way of oppressing others. Don't ever take advantage of your power, your position, your money, whatever it is that you have as a means of oppressing others, but rather demonstrate the gospel to them by washing their feet. When you serve them, that's when you are following me. I mean, how can you miss that? This is so amazing, but that's exactly what Jesus had done. Keep this in your mind as you listen to the rest of this message. The tone of chapter 13, I think chapter 13 is an amazing chapter. Because it talks about how Jesus loved his disciples to the end. How Jesus' love is just going all the way. It's ultimate. And that love is demonstrated. Now, I'm going to go into much of what I will spend my message on. It'll be demonstrated in the midst of failures of his disciples. It's not when the disciples are successful. It's not when the disciples are all lovely. But when they are failing. It's when they are utterly ugly. That's when Jesus is doing this. And he is inviting us to do the same. And what we also see in this chapter is how in the ugliness of failures and sin, Jesus is still in control. He's not becoming a victim of Judas Iscariot's betrayal. Jesus does not play a victim. Jesus is still the Lord and Master. He faces it. And that's really the tone of chapter 13. And I'm really hoping that you will see that and understand. And we ourselves get absorbed into this chapter. We become part of this chapter, and we become, immersed in this chapter ourselves and understand what the Lord is calling us to do. First, I'm going to talk about Judas Iscariot, because that's a big issue, isn't it, in this chapter. His issue appears as early as verse 2. It is also mentioned during the feet washing, also again in verse 18, and the entire passage 21, verse 21 and the following that I read for us in the beginning. It's an uncomfortable situation. Something about Judas Iscariot. I wonder if you had some thoughts spent on the identity of this man. And what is this man about? I think there's this kind of idea that Judas Iscariot is just an unfortunate actor in the story of Jesus. Every story needs a villain, and he happens to be the villain. And he's sort of used for the purpose of getting something done. So in one sense, you pity him, but why fault him? There are people that are sympathetic to Judas, and they say something like, what Judas really wanted a restoration of his own people, Israel. That's why he followed Jesus as the leader that he saw, the Messiah. And while Jesus was continually talking about giving his life for the world, Judas couldn't bear that kind of scenario. So he did all these things to kind of push Jesus to the limit. push him to the limit so that he will get to that point where he says, oh no, I can't have this. So he will rise up to the occasion and become the kind of ruler that he ought to be, or leader that he ought to be. So Judas was kind of playing the mind of Jesus into doing something that he wasn't willing to do. Is it really true? I mean, should we even give any thoughts to these kind of descriptions about Judas? I don't know if you're that familiar with like the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. It used to be really big when I was growing up. And they still do this musical in different places. And Judas Iscariot is not just the villain, but he's really one of the main characters in the story. He really makes the story. Oh, and he burst out into all these songs where he's really contemplating deeper issues than what we may see in the pages of John, Gospel of John. But let me tell you that John was the one who was most intimately involved in the story, the writer of this gospel. He was right there for 3 years. He was right there, even in this passage. He's recording from verse 1 to the end of the passage we read, something that only he knew. Other disciples didn't even know. This is something that I knew. This is something that Jesus told me. He whispered to my ears. This is a really inside information. I know about John. I know about Judas. And John is very straightforward. I want to tell you that John does not waver. He's not hinting all these other possibility, but he's just straightforward with the way he describes Judas Iscariot. I'm gonna ask a few questions. Number one, why did Judas Iscariot betray Jesus? Why did he do that? Okay, so people are postulating that he had these kind of more nobler kind of motivation, but is that really true? But John does not give that room. John actually says the problem with Judas Iscariot was that he was a sinner to a point where he just wasn't receptive to the gospel of Jesus. His heart was not regenerate. There was something deeply troubled about this man, that his heart was corrupt. This is what he says in chapter 12, verse 6. It's a story about Jesus' feet being anointed, and Judas is the one who gets really upset about it because he feels like there's such a waste of expensive perfume. And John writes it this way. He said this, Judas said this, not because he cared about the poor, because he said, why don't we sell it and give the proceeding to the poor? Wouldn't it be a lot better than just wasting on the feet of Jesus? He said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. We hear about Judas being the keeper of the money bag in this community, right, of the 12 and Jesus, that this community of Jesus, the little community, they had a treasurer, and the treasurer, the one who kept the money bag, was Judas. And he was a thief. John knew this. And he looks back and realizes, how can we be so fooled by this? Jesus knew, but just let it happen. That this man was taking the money from the money bag for his own use. The word is very strong, isn't it? He's a thief. He's a thief. He's a liar. He's a deceiver. His intention is to fill his sinful desire with unrighteous proceeds. If you go back to chapter 6, there's actually a point where Jesus describes this one man as devilish or devil. The word is really devil. One of you is a devil. And it's very clear. It's the one who has sort of aligned himself with the devil. The reason why he doesn't understand or he's unwilling to listen to the voice of the good news of Jesus, the reason why he's not going to find in Jesus the way, the life, and truth, is because he just is not able to listen. He's not going to listen. Why? Because he's contracted with the devil, in a sense. He's devilish. That's the word. The devil is a murderer from the beginning. John chapter 8 says. There's no truth in him. He's a liar, and he's the father of lies. Utterly corrupt being. It's amazing that devil was a fallen angel. There's something glorious about his being as one who's created with such power and knowledge. In the stories of the Gospels, it's amazing that the devil knew who Jesus was. Devil had power, yet there's one thing he would never do, that is turn to Jesus and believe in him. Turn to God and repent. His will is utterly bent. His will is utterly corrupt. And here's Judas, who's devilish. It's a very tragic story of a man. Chapter 13, we come back, and verse 2 says, during the supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus, the thought entered into the heart, the mind of Judas Iscariot, to betray Jesus, to sell him. This is something that he meditated for a long time. This is not a heat of a moment thing, but the thought had entered in. And Judas does not reject this thought. Judas entertains it, he embraces it, he acts upon it. And then what happens? Verse 27, then after he had taken the morsel, Satan, or the devil, entered into him. Entered into him. So there is a complete brokenness of his personhood. It's amazing that the devil has an aim to be so destructive. He's a murderer. He's a thief. He's a liar. He's just utterly evil, so that he would even try his utmost to bring others, children of God's making, the very human beings that are created in the image of God, he would even bring them into destruction. Devil would put a seal on Judas' conscience. The very will, the volition of Judas is hijacked. And what is properly man is destroyed in Judas. There's no active moral consciousness. Judas is utterly corrupt in his heart, and the very humanness, the very personhood is in the process of being turned off. So you picture him coming into the garden where Jesus is with his disciples. On chapter 18, when we get there, you will see Judas coming to take Jesus away with soldiers from the temple, with servants, with weapons. And Judas would betray Jesus with a kiss. How utterly shameless. How utterly shameless. See how a person just is being destroyed. You know, you shouldn't look at somebody who's sinning. You shouldn't look at somebody who's shameless. You shouldn't look at somebody who is bold in demonstrating one's corruptness and say, wow, he's strong or she's strong. No, that's not a strength of a humanity. That's devilish. The very strength of humanity the intellect, the emotion, and the will aligned with the very Maker, the Creator of us. As that's what salvation is, as the Holy Spirit comes into our hearts. Not to possess us, to hijack all that is truly what we are. But what God does in us is that He recreates the true me. He renews me, He renews you and me to a point where we are made into true humanity. And that's the goal. That's the heavenly reality. That what God has in mind is to bring us to that glorious finality of what God intended us from the very beginning as He made us, to be glorious human beings, to be most human, to be most mannish. Whereas you see those who are led by thought, by feeling, and by volition to the devilish way. Not something strong, not something powerful, but it is utter sadness, destruction, pitiful, miserable. And finally, this man, Judas Iscariot, enters into that final destruction where he takes his own life in the most tragic way. Now the question might come to your mind, and I heard this many times, that is, if Jesus is so powerful to do what He does and what He's able to do, why couldn't He stop Judas from going into this path of destruction? Why? Why would He let him go that way? Well, we don't know all the answer, but at least I could attempt this, that Jesus, yes, he knew everything. That's really the story of chapter 13. He knew, entire John really, he knew what was going on. Again, Jesus wasn't victimized. He wasn't like shocked by the betrayal. And Jesus felt like he was, just deceived by this man who was so crafty. No, nothing like that. Jesus fully knew what was going on. In fact, in verse 21, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Now, as I read this verse, I don't think Jesus was troubled in his heart because he was sad that somebody would betray him. It's not that one of his disciples would turn his back on him. That's not why he was troubled. Peter does the same thing, right? Peter denies Jesus. He does it even in a private setting. He brings curse down from heaven. He's doing everything to deny that he knew Jesus. And Peter was, in a sense, almost equally bad, right? But there is no place in the gospel or any other gospels where Jesus is upset at Peter for that. Jesus is not troubled because Peter would deny him. Because it's not about being betrayed. This is not about Jesus feeling getting hurt, but it's about Jesus pitying the destiny of this man. He's pitying, he's troubled by what Judas is and where his life is headed. And if that's so, if Jesus was troubled by the very fate of this man, and that Jesus was in control of all things, and in fact, more and more you read it, he was not overruled or he was not taken over by the evil that is being acted upon him. No. Jesus knows what's going on. In fact, it's Jesus who told him, he said, go and do what you have to do. He's the one who is controlling every single flow of the events. And the question is, if Jesus is God, He's able, why would He not stop him from this destruction? I have to tell you that this is where our knowledge sort of breaks down. We know that when someone is saved, when we are saved, it is not because of what we've done for that salvation. The salvation is not initiated by us. It is God's initiation. It is God who saves. Why does then God, why does He? Yes, He saves some, but why would He let go some? Why would some be left while He saves those that He would save? If He's able to, shouldn't He save all people? Now it's an observation. We are saved, and by the work of the Spirit, there's that assurance that's given to us. But one thing we know for sure, there's none of us who can say, I know I'm saved because I'm good. I know that person not saved because that person is bad. And we talked about how there was evil that was acting in the heart of Judas. Therefore, he's responsible for what he's doing. Judas is responsible for his evil. It's not like, he somehow intended well, but things didn't go well. There's something very utterly wrong about him. But don't we say also that, then therefore, I am not like that. Therefore, I am worthy to be saved? Oh, no, not at all. I think in many ways we suffer a lot of inward strives because we know how evil we are. We know how deceitful we can be. We know how lies can happen in us almost naturally. Isn't it amazing that God confronts us with His truth? Isn't it amazing that the Spirit is working in our hearts to awaken our conscience? Isn't it amazing that we are not only free to, in a sense, choose sin, and often we do, but God has also enabled our will by giving us new life that we could choose good? It's amazing that all these things are happening to us and in us, but can we ever take credit for it and say, we did it? We're the ones who have come along a long way to be where we are? No. I think that the essence of the gospel is we are saved despite what we really are. We were once dead in our sin and our transgression. Not different from Judas in that sense, but we are given a new life. Why does that happen to us but not to Judas? It's something that we cannot fully grasp. I tell you, there's a mystery to it. The reason why we need to dwell in this mystery is because we never, ever get to a point where we say, I am saved because I deserve it. Judas is not because he doesn't deserve it. We can never say that. But it happened. It happened. Why? Well, to God, this is not a mystery. I think God, He's not doing it in a sense that things are happening randomly to Him. No, God's not surprised by anything. But to us, this is a mystery. We don't really know. This is where we say, we just don't know. We just don't know. But one thing we do observe, this is important, one thing we observe is that in the way God works with us, in the way Jesus works with His disciples, or anybody, Jesus does not turn them into a piece of machine. Jesus does not turn off their will, their personhood. There's no place where Jesus just rules out or overrules their human will. We talk about free will a lot. That free will is never outside of God's permission. But one thing we know is that God made us people who are responsible for our actions. We choose what we choose because we will it. But don't be too overly confident on this, because as human beings we know that we are dependent. What we do, even what food we want to eat, you know that there's a lot going on in our makeup. some genetic, some environmental, but so much of things have come together to make us who we are, and in that sense, we know what limits there are to this idea of our choosing. But nevertheless, God did not make us as robots or not machines. We're not simply living out someone else's program. There's a humanness that God has created for us. That's what we are. We are responsible for our actions. And Jesus did not override it. He didn't turn that off. Even in Judas, even in Peter, they acted out their heart's intention. We know. C.S. Lewis talks about hell in that way, right? He says hell is basically a consistent working out of a rebellion against God. A one who is in hell is not put there against his will. In fact, it's his will being done. The door of the hell is locked from inside, not from outside, because they would not, like the demon, like Satan, would ever want to face the glorious and holy God. They reject him utterly. And they are buried in the isolation, in the hell, where they lock themselves away from God. It's tragic because hell is not where a person can live. Hell is not where personality can survive. It's where personhood is utterly destroyed. Oh, that's for some other time. We may also ask whether the betrayal of Judas was absolutely necessary for the work of redemption of Jesus Christ. Isn't it true that God used him? My thoughts on that is this. Jesus died according to the prophecy, the will of God as was planned in salvation history. God worked it out. Jesus would have done what he has done even if there was no Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot took the role of the villain in this story according to his own will. And what I see God doing is God is not promoting evil, God is not generating evil, but God is able to turn the evil around in a way that it ultimately is used for good. And one example I could give along this line is, when you are very advanced in judo, I'm not, but I guess in theory I know how this is, that when someone is attacking you with his energy, with his force, the judo expert will not stop that energy, but rather will use that energy and revert it in such a way that attacker is the one who loses, right? He's able to flip him over by using the attacker's strength. That's the expert in judo. I think we have scenes like that where Judas meant horrible evil upon Jesus, even to the other disciples. And can you imagine the kind of hurt and the betrayal they would have experienced at this shameless act of turning Jesus over for money? He acted evilly, but Jesus turned that act of evil as a way of generating salvation and redemption for us. And the same kind of story is found in the book of Acts, where Peter preaches to the congregation. That's when 3,000 are converted. You are the one who gave Jesus away into evil hands. You are the one who did it. In fact, those are the ones who nailed Jesus to the cross, but God took the cross of Jesus Christ as a way to bring salvation and raise Christ's lordship above all. Cross was the very act of God's redemption. So, what evil done is evil done. You don't beautify it. It is evil. What Judas had done is evil. It's wrong, but God did not create that evil. God did not generate that evil. It's not God who promoted that evil, but rather God turned that evil into His good purpose. So if there's any misunderstanding about what is being done here, I think it's important that we kind of sort things out a little bit and we see what the intention of the Scripture is, what it is teaching us. If there's anything that's been somewhat puzzling or unclear, you could certainly ask me personally. But let me bring this message to a fitting closure, because our interest is really not ultimately in Judas Iscariot. Our interest is then what? What do we do? Chapter 13, I think, is basically showing us, as I read it over and over, I think what it's showing us is that, there are human failures everywhere. The people are going to fail, and there will be Judas Iscariot, and there will be Peter, the denier, and there will be all the other disciples who will run away. So you are sort of in the midst of this continuous human failures. What do you do? What do you do? One thing we know is that Jesus is still in control, and Jesus is dealing with each and every one according to the way He deals with them. So He's dealing with Judas Iscariot. He's dealing with Peter. He's going to deal with every single one of you and me, right? Because oftentimes we're the ones who are failing miserably. He deals with us just as He's dealing with all these other characters. And Jesus is in control. Jesus is in control. And if that's how it is, people are failing all around us. I am failing. There's a miserable demonstration of sin all around. What do you do knowing that Jesus is dealing with every one of these people and Jesus is still in control of the situation? What do we do? I think what we need to do is just fix our eyes on Jesus. We need to have the eyes of Jesus and look at all things. We continue to look to Him and see ourselves to see if we are actually in faith. We are continually trusting Him. And whenever we see issues in us, we don't simply walk away feeling like, well, what can I do? No, we repent. We turn around. We continue to turn to Jesus. That's what it means to believe in Him. We continue to turn to Jesus, knowing that He is concerned about us. That the very eyes and the heart of Jesus Christ, they are fixed on each and every one of us. He's not overcome by how many there are of us. He's not confused by that. He understands every particularity of who you are, right? Knowing that He is your Lord. He is my Lord. Every time we feel confused, every time we feel dejected, we still look to Jesus. There's no other way. Look to Jesus. When people fail all around you, look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. Don't be immersed in that kind of situation where you begin to grumble and complain and basically say, there's no hope. Even a church community may often have times when we feel like there's no way out, but that's when we look to Jesus. When it's so easy to blame people for their failures and sins, look to Jesus because He is dealing with every particular person in His way, and He's in control. And then, one more thing, we got to do what Jesus told us to do. That is what? Wash each other's feet. And love one another as Christ loved us. And you know what washing each other's feet means? You have to deal with their sins. Oftentimes, it means loving to a point where you deal with it, you cover it, not to cover it up, but to work it out. You need to embrace it. You need to forgive. Please be quick to forgive. Don't have grudge in your heart against one another. And continue to have that remind you. People are going to fail all around you. You fail, I fail, we all fail. But Jesus is still working. Jesus is in control. And when you have people fail around you, wash their feet. Because that's what He did for us. Wash each other's feet. Love by coming under. Being willing to associate with the lowly. Being willing to get your hands dirty. Being willing to love. We can't do it in our own strength, right? We do it because Jesus enables us. May the Lord give us strength to live out in this world where there's such failures all around. Let's pray.